it's Trans Day of Visibility, so this, I've already had to buy a pepperoni pizza, but apparently there's this particular thing as well, the trans panic clickbait economy, and I want to take a look at this. I want to read through this, see what point is being made, and the reason that I'm okay doing that is Dead Domain retweeted this, and I trust Dead Domain. I generally think that they've got a fantastic head on their shoulders. So usually, if they're retweeting something, it's something that is worth taking a look at. So let's go ahead and see what is going on here. So the past few weeks, my social media feeds have been more apocalyptic than usual. Not due to the escalating war with Iran, the shell-shocked economy, or oil prices, but because of a wave of posts and news articles proclaiming imminent doom for trans people in the United States. Attacks on trans rights are obviously not new and have steadily risen over the past few years, but this recent collection of worrying claims are especially apocalyptic or outright genocidal. I mean, if you use the strictest definition of genocide, using the actual 10 stages of genocide, then that is a thing that is happening, so yeah, sure. That's why that would be the case, because it's the actual term applies. So, okay. Just this month, I've seen viral posts citing online articles saying that ICE is going to round up and disappear trans people, that the FDA is making a national registry of trans women, and that an adult trans healthcare ban is rapidly on the way. These panic-inducing claims and articles they're sourced from are referring to real things or movements happening in anti-trans activism, regulations, and legislation, but are framed in a way to maximize catastrophe rather than understanding what's actually happening at the moment and what we can do about it. Okay, so yes, but two problems. One, we live in a clickbait economy. I wish we didn't. I wish that we lived in a world where you didn't have to clickbait to get attention, but that is quite literally what the attention economy is. Secondly, that seems like the article saying, yes, these things are happening, but my criticism is that all you've said is that they're happening. And you know what? That's fair if the only criticism you can give is that the articles talk about catastrophe in a catastrophic way, but like, if a registry of trans women is being made, if adult healthcare trans bans are being talked about on the national stage, then those are catastrophes. That's definitionally what those things are. Uncritically engaging with panic bait reduces the process of staying informed to being in a state of constant doom and feeling hopeless against an unstoppable enemy, or risks causing people to completely check out and not believe anything they see online, even if it is a real pressing threat. Both of these outcomes cloud our ability to accurately assess and respond to very real threats. Okay, that I agree with. I actually do agree with that. Said Brick Griff says there's clickbait and then there's vague posting. They go hand in hand. They do. I agree. I agree those things do go hand in hand. But, okay, so for this point, I actually generally am in agreement. I think that pointing out that bad things are happening is only part of what you need to do. You also need to give people solutions, give people actionable items that they can engage with so that they can actually solve problems, because otherwise it's just freaking out about this stuff. Like, I have a friend of mine who is trans, who is in Florida, who does have this like panic about every little thing response, and that includes them not taking HRT because they are panicked about bad things happening to them there, and yet they're also like 100% having their mental faculties destroyed by dysphoria. So like, it's the damned if you do, damned if you don't, you might as well be happy living as yourself, Jesus fucking Christ shit. And so I can understand having a frustration with that panic economy, as it were, because that panic economy births that, where people choose not to do things that would improve their life or circumstance because they are worried about things getting worse in other areas, and so they just kind of stagnate and get worse and worse and worse. And so yeah, I 100% understand that. At the same time, when we're looking at what our government is doing in regards to trans people, it's definitely not catastrophizing to point out like the things that they're actually doing. Like when RFK Jr. says that he wants to put autistic people, for instance, in work camps, what are we supposed to take from that? Like, what are we supposed to glean from that? What are we supposed to take in that regard? When Marjorie Taylor Greene, before she left office, when she was fighting every day to have trans healthcare revoked in Georgia, what are we supposed to take from that other than that people are in fact attacking your lives? Like that's what's happening. At the same time, one of the bills that a lot of Congress people were voting for in Georgia, the Narcan bill that had a ban on trans healthcare built in, through awareness and fighting on behalf of multiple people, including Equality Georgia, which I was a part of, for that demonstration, for that attempt at lobbying. We were able to fight back on that and get that bill to the point where it was just dead in the water. So like there are things you can do, and pointing out those things is important. I feel like I'm belaboring the point here a little bit, but I think that my issue is when catastrophizing happens without a solution. But I also think that catastrophizing is like, it's not an undue thing to point at, because what's happening is a catastrophe. So, migrating while trans. The bulk of this article will focus on the story claiming that ICE is now permitted to detain anyone for looking trans. This story and the online discussion around it is a schematic example of how we understand both Trump administration's attack on trans people and how and why ICE operates as an agency. On March 12th, a Substack article was posted with the headline, "Trump administration opens the door to ICE to target anyone suspected of being trans." The subheadline continues by reading, "Under a new rule, the State Department will be able to revoke trans persons' visas over misrepresentation. It'll give ICE grounds to suspect all trans people of being in the U.S. illegally." The information contained in the headline is the furthest many people will engage with the content of the article. Combining that headline with the preconceived notions about how ICE functions under the Trump administration makes this a very frightening claim. So what evidence does the article include to support the claim? Earlier this month, the State Department updated its policy for the Diversity Immigrant Visa Program, also known as the Green Card Lottery. New State Department rules require that applicants upload a scan of their foreign passport's biographic and signature page to help cut down on fraudulent DV program entries. The policy update also changed the gender entry to sex on the form. In the policy rule update on the State Department, the marker reflected in the sex field in any visa application, including the entry form, should match the applicant's biological sex at birth, even if that differs from the sex listed on their foreign passport or other identifying documentation. The Substack article claims this could force a mismatch between trans people's applications and their passports, something it can then use to declare their applications fraudulent and disqualify them entirely. The first half of that sentence is true. A mismatch may occur between gender on foreign documents and sex listed in the U.S. visa application, but it's not the case that this mismatch will inevitably result in the application being deemed fraudulent and then denied. So if the article claims that it could force a mismatch that can then be used to declare the application's fraudulent, but then your claim is that, well, that doesn't necessarily end up happening. I feel like there's a bit of a bait and switch that happened here, because saying it's not the case that this mismatch will inevitably result in that, but that's not the words you even use to define what happened in the article. Like, maybe there can be a conversation about more accurate wording, but I feel like that would go both ways here, wouldn't it? Because what I'm reading here is that you think that the argument being made is that it's an inevitability that the application would be denied, but based on what's written here, it can then use it to declare applications fraudulent and disqualify them entirely. That doesn't necessarily imply that it's what's necessarily going to happen. It's just an option that is now opened up to ICE. Again, we're dealing with an article that has a clickbait article to begin with, or a clickbait title to begin with, so maybe there is an argument for not giving grace where the article was written. According to Melita Picasso, staff attorney for the ACLU's LGBTQ and HIV Rights Project, the kind of fraud this rule change is trying to combat by requiring a passport scan is not unique to trans people. Picasso said in an email that the new rule seems to be more directly targeting fraudulent activities involving third parties, basically entering the lottery on behalf of individuals without their knowledge and consent, and then extorting them for large amounts of money if they are selected. The stipulation requiring an applicant to list their biological sex at birth on forms has already already been State Department policy for both immigrant and non-immigrant visa applications for over a year, effectively since Trump's EO order mandating the U.S. government officially recognize two biological sexes, which are determined at birth, and that government-issued identity documents, including visas and all forms that require an individual sex, shall accurately reflect an individual's immutable biological classification as either male or female. Claiming that a mismatch between gender listed on a foreign document and a sex marked on an application will itself dequalify someone from receiving a visa has little or no basis in government policy. Picasso told me that the new policy itself recognizes this could cause discrepancies and that she doesn't see a new or heightened risk of being accused of fraud or willful misrepresentation if a trans person follows the instructions by listing their sex assigned at birth on the application, even if they also file a birth certificate that has been updated to reflect their gender identity. Okay, so the argument seems to be, if I am getting this correctly, that the original article that's being talked about here is effectively saying that this is a thing that can happen. And the ACLU and organizations that, are paid to look after this kind of stuff are saying that, well, it's probably not going to change that. Okay? At that point, like, the biggest problem seems to be that the original article poster was wrong. But with an administration that has been as virulent against trans people as the Trump administration, my question would be, is the belief well-founded? That would be my question, because I can understand the point of panic about the government using any, little law or little stipulation it can to fuck over trans people. I can understand panic over that when you consider the fact that that is something that Trump will do. He has used legal loopholes to circumvent people's rights already. Hell, that's kind of how we ended up in war with Iran. He didn't use the legal process to get into war with Iran, but he 100% managed to make it happen by circumventing a loophole by not calling it a war. It's just a military operation, The military operation where we invade a country and bomb it. Usually we call that a war, but according to Trump, we don't. So I can kind of understand where both sides of here are coming from. Also, there's another part of this that I think has to be considered realistically, where if you are trans and you're dealing with the current Trump administration, you've been dealing with the administration doing as many anti-trans things as it has been doing for the last year and a half, and, the shit that it did during the last administration, like with the trans military ban and other shit, it makes sense to see demons around every corner, because that is what the Trump administration has made you do. And it's actually Steve Bannon's entire political philosophy is to make people see demons around every corner. It is evidence that the political strategy of the Trump administration is working. It's making media see that there's problems everywhere, and so they can't focus on anything that's actually happening with the Trump admin. I can understand the perspective of the original article writer, having not read the article, but just looking at the representation from here, and I can understand the perspective from here saying, hey, you're catastrophizing, and that doesn't really make things better. Okay, later in April of 2025, USCIS officially updated their policy on requiring biological sex on immigration applications. The policy also states that USCIS does not deny immigration benefits solely based on a failure to properly indicate the benefits of a requester's or the benefit requester's sex. ACLU staff attorney Melita Picasso told me that USCIS officials do have a lot of discretion, that the policy warns that failure to list biological sex will cause delays while they try to verify your sex assigned at birth. The State Department has said that there are grounds to deny visa applications for trans people if they make a willful, affirmative, material act of misrepresentation by misrepresenting their biological sex at birth. Well, hold on. That seems to argue in favor of the original article writer, because if a trans person says, I'm a woman, but they were born male, but, let's say, for instance, this hypothetical trans person has gone through all the sex reassignment shit, they've taken all the medications, all the hormones, they've had vaginoplasty, whatever. This person, like, in every conceivable way except a fucking gamete, that's just a woman at that point. Their hormones are saying that. Their phenotype is saying that. Their genitalia is saying that. Everything is saying that. The gonadal representation has been taken away completely. Like, all you have left is gamete. That's it. And nobody looks under your skirt for fucking gametes. So that person saying, yeah, I'm a woman. They're not willfully and affirmatively misrepresenting their sex. That's just who they are. Like, the state could easily make the argument that they're doing that. That seems weird to me, because that's the thing you're arguing isn't happening, and the thing the ACLU argues won't happen seems to be the thing that, like, on text would happen? I'm confused. So this language was written to restrict trans athletes from entering the country to play sports. The sort of misrepresentation the State Department is talking about is if a trans woman misrepresents her birth sex to procure a visa or administration of the country, or admission into the country for the purpose of competing in a women's sports competition. Okay, what's to say that they wouldn't use that precedent in other areas? Like, once they've established it, there's nothing to say that they wouldn't. Like, I'm very confused. Like, we can make the argument that it's unlikely that things will get worse in that regard, because people who are experts in this field have said that, like, yeah, it's probably not going to get worse for trans people in this particular regard. But to argue that there is no reason to be concerned when new laws are being written against trans people, and this is one of them, that also confuses me. The same sports memo, dated February 24th, 2025, also states if there is a discrepancy in either the application's documents or in electronics consulate records, or if other evidence casts reasonable doubt on the applicant's sex, you should refuse the case and request additional evidence to demonstrate sex at birth. It's a temporary visa refusal pending further documents or information provided by the applicant. Okay? But the Substack article doesn't just claim that being trans could disqualify you from receiving a visa. The article escalates its claim to say that trans people who have already have a valid visa could have it revoked and be deported for misrepresenting their sex in the past. The author of this Substack cites U.S. law that if an alien is found to have obtained a visa by fraud or willfully representing a material fact, they are ineligible to be in the United States. Oh, okay. Again, that seems to be the case there, though. Like, okay, this is one of those situations where the letter of the law says what the Substack article writer argues it says. The spirit of it, the actual execution of that law, may not end in that result, and that seems to be what is more important for the person who's writing this article. But if the actual law as written is one that has, like, all of the ability to fuck over the trans person, how would you not assume that it would do that? Like, where is that particularly coming from? The author links to another one of her own articles on her own articles. Hold on. Substack article, her own articles. Is this Aaron Reed? Are we talking about Aaron Reed? Is that what's going on here? I don't know if this is Aaron Reed, but let's see here. Because, like, Aaron in the Morning is a Substack, I believe, and she does write a lot about the ways our government is fucking over shit for trans people. She has the National Legal Risk Assessment map here. Like, this is her bag. I don't know who specifically is being argued about here, and I feel like it would be a good idea for us to be able to see who's being argued about here, so that I could actually, like, read the original article. That would be incredibly helpful here. Let's see here. Substack article. Okay, cool. Not Aaron Reed. The original article is here. Okay. Trump admin opens the door for ICE to target anyone suspected of being trans. Again, it does open the door for that. The legislation as written, basically what you said here, that seems to be what could happen. Now, whether or not that happens in execution, different story, but the fact that it's opened up legally to happen, that seems to be what's happening here. Merlana says, I'm sure the corrupt crime government won't escalate to even greater crimes against humanity. The author links to another one of her own articles on federal policy regarding the issue of U.S. passports with sex markers. So I think it's dangerous to even suggest that a legally obtained invalid birth certificate could be viewed as fake without a much clearer statement from the federal government to that effect, Picasso advised. Trump's recent travel bans have specifically mentioned the availability of fake birth certificates in certain countries. This whole claim about trans people visas being revoked because of accusations of misrepresentation is contradicted by the State Department, which said last year, Sanic stuff, thank you for the follow. which said last year currently valid U.S. visas issued prior to the effective date of this guidance bearing a sex identifier to the visas holders' sex identified in the EO will remain valid through its expiration date. Okay, there we go. There's an actual bit that contradicts what the article is claiming. If the EO says that, and this is a quote, I have no reason to believe that it's a misquote, then okay, cool. At that point, Alexandra is incorrect, saying that there could be a backlog of shit that is thrown out at that point. Okay. Fair enough. The first half of the article covers what I argue are misrepresentations of state documents' visa policy. The second half speculates on how this misrepresentation could be enforced by ICE. In a Supreme Court ruling last year, Justice Kavanaugh wrote that ICE could detain people based on a combination of factors, such as working a certain kind of job, ethnicity, speaking Spanish, or talking with an accent. Kavanaugh said that ICE can detain someone for questioning if they have a reasonable suspicion based on specific, articulable facts that the person being questioned is an illegal alien in the United States. With a substantial leap in logic, the Substack author argues that Kavanaugh's concurrence effectively permitted ICE to use the fact that someone looks trans as the specific, articulable fact its officers to question, harass, detain, and even deport citizens and non-citizens as long as it has a reason to claim that being trans makes a person more likely to be in the U.S. illegally. Okay, so an assumption is being made here. And the assumption being made here is that every person who's working for ICE will be a reasonable individual. If they're all reasonable individuals, then sure, Justice Kavanaugh's words do not actually allow them to say shit about people being trans. But if we agree that most people who work for ICE may not be reasonable individuals, that's why they're working for fucking ICE, then I'm sorry, but I think it's kind of on shaky ground that they wouldn't do anything like this. Mirlana says it's kind of a mixed bag. The thing is, the Supreme Court precedent already allows law enforcement to jam just about anyone up so long as they can articulate a reason why and they can cite experience as a reason. Yeah, like that's the thing. I want, because the article writer seems to be coming from a place that I agree with, right? The place of, hey, let's spread less panic and spread more information. Let's get more people on board with tackling problems and less people on board with widespread panic. And that's perfectly fine and reasonable. But it seems to also be arguing that there is no reason for panic in this particular regard. And I would argue that based on the rules as written, there is reason for concern. But let me see here. So, like, we have information about ICE detaining trans people as well. Transgender people in ICE detention describes their conditions as dreadful, ugly, being dehumanized daily, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Transgender asylum seekers are often not accounted for, as it can take weeks or months for lawyers to fully understand how a person identifies. Trans people who are detained all require specialized mental care, and many have specific social and medical needs that cannot be met, with claims of medical neglect, lack of mental healthcare, sexual harassment and assault, and the use of solitary confinement. Given how risky it is to detain trans people and the medical and social needs of the population, one would think they should be released from detention, if not all of them. Allegra Love says, the executive director for the Santa Fe Dreamers Project. Okay, so this does not give evidence for or against ICE doing dreadful shit in order to detain trans people, but it does show that people who are trans, who are being detained by ICE, are experiencing really fucking terrible shit. The Transgender Law Center actually has an area on resources for ICE raids, and this could be something that could be helpful for you. Like, if we're in the spirit of the person who wrote the article, let's spread less panic and let's spread more information. Trans Law Center actually has an area to talk about what to do in regards to ICE. Be aware of address history. Be prepared for contact with ICE. Be aware of address history and or work addresses that the Department of Homeland Security has. Make photocopies. Them to a U.S. citizen friend if you have had interactions with immigration before and you have been issued a number. Make sure a trusted U.S. citizen person knows your A number. Make a plan for children who may be left behind. If you have an attorney, make sure a friend or family member contacts that attorney if you are picked up by ICE. If you've ever been arrested, give a U.S. citizen friend a copy of your criminal documents and your attorney's number if you feel comfortable. Do not carry your foreign passport or any identification from your country of origin. If asked where you're from or where you were born, you say, I want to talk to a lawyer. Do not give ICE fake documents. Don't open the door without seeing a warrant, despite the fact that Kristi Noem argued that you can break the door down without a warrant. ICE is allowed to lie to get in your home. Yep. If they don't have a warrant, then legally they can't enter, even though Kristi Noem said that they can. Be prepared and expect ICE agents will enter without a warrant and be aggressive. Yeah, again, Kristi Noem argued that they can, so they will. Do not lie or give ICE fake documents. It's best to stay silent rather than lie. Do not sign anything for them. Keep your immigration papers close. Do not resist and comply with orders and try to be as calm as possible. Expedited removal equals no meeting with a judge. If you fear persecution, if deported, speak up. Tell the immigration officer you fear persecution. Remember that ICE can lie to you in detention, and remember badge numbers or physical descriptions of officers. Bravo Needs Bacon says, Noem is an unqualified whore. Don't know about that last part, but unqualified, absolutely. So, again, Transgender Law Center does have an area here if you want to reference this for what to do if ICE does come around. And I think that's important for you to know so that we can, again, spread more information, spread less panic. So the main thing that makes me believe that ICE will not suddenly start targeting people for being trans is that this State Department policy requires sex at birth on visas applications. It's not actually new. It's existed since February of 2025 for both immigrants and non-immigrant visas. The only recent change is that the green card lottery rules have been updated to use the same language. Nothing about this new rule makes it more or less likely that ICE will be free to scrutinize trans people, affirmed Picasso. Put plainly, the State Department's restriction on stating assigned sex at birth or green card visa applications does not give ICE new justification to roam around disappearing random people who look trans, but it could make border crossings more risky for non-citizens and visa applications harder to navigate and subject to delays. This policy from the State Department is bad, but turning that into ICE is going to round up trans people and V-code them doesn't understand how this will actually affect immigrant trans people. V-coding being the systematic enabling of sexual abuse towards incarcerated trans women in order to please male prisoners. Near the end of the article, the author suggests that trans Kansans could be at extra risk of getting detained by ICE because of a new law invalidating driver's licenses and birth certificates with amended gender markers, possibly leaving some U.S. citizens temporarily unable to prove citizenship with a valid birth certificate. In that case, a passport would be ideal. Otherwise, a hospital birth certificate or early school records can theoretically be used to prove citizenship, because all of us have our school records all the time and passports. Right. Even the birth certificate one, I lost at a certain point when it actually got stolen from me. So, like, I don't know. It's worth reiterating that a citizen temporarily losing documentation does not put them at the same level of marginalized risk as an undocumented immigrant. The new Kansas law does direct the offices of vital statistics to reissue birth certificates when necessary to correct the sex identification. Similarly, DMVs were instructed to reissue corrected licenses once the invalidated one was turned in. So, I don't remember the discourse largely with the Kansas thing being that ICE was going to increase scrutiny on you. I remember the discourse being that it was technically illegal for you to drive during that time. And because of how plate running works, if it's illegal for you to drive at the time that the plates are ran, then a officer, it's up to their discretion, but they can literally just not give a shit at that point. They can just not give a shit about the circumstances of why you weren't able to be a legal driver at that point. They'll just fucking throw you in jail. Again, ask me how the fuck I know. Ask me how I know they'll just throw you in jail and not give a shit. Because that happened to me. The details of my situation didn't matter. What mattered is that I was an illegal driver for a day. And that's all that mattered. Nitro says, I'm surprised Noem didn't pose nude in that photo shoot of hers in front of all those cramped CSOT prisoners. I am not surprised. I feel like I'd be more surprised if she did do that. Okay. I'm, on the one hand, like I said, I agree with the general idea of the article that, like, hey, the panic does not help us. On the other hand, to argue that, like, none of this can lead to an increase of things, I think is maybe a little disingenuous. It still can. I do not believe that ICE is suddenly going to be so reasonable that any of these arguments will actually fly for them. So I don't know. But I do think that people should be informed and not necessarily just fucking panicking. But then we have the doomer discourse thing. The unsubstantiated claims in this article went viral across social media platforms like TikTok, Blue Sky, and Twitter, bolstering speculation. Social media posts even further extrapolating the potential harm faced by trans people, by ICE agents, beyond the claims made in the article by saying ICE will now deport or disappear trans citizens. Okay, so At that point, your scrutiny is about the natural game of telephone that happens with people. I agree it's frustrating, right? Where, like, you make a somewhat hyperbolic statement, even though that statement may be based in truth, and then somebody takes that somewhat hyperbolic statement and hyperbolizes it even more, and then the next person in the game of telephone hyperbolizes it a little bit more, and eventually you get a fisherman's tale where a 6-pound guppy becomes a 30-pound leviathan. And I can understand that frustration, but that is a thing that's naturally gonna happen with the current age of fast information. People care about getting information out to people quickly and messily more than they care about the information being accurate. And that is a frustration that I share. I get it, but okay. Anybody who tried to push back on the legitimacy of these were labeled dangerous or feds for trying to downplay the threat posed by ICE. I think we should do both. I think we should accept that these are threats that should not be downplayed, but also recognize that the likelihood of things happening to you does not magically increase. Back and forth discourse largely took 3 forms. One saying that it's because ICE is already doing bad things. They could also start doing this new bad thing. 2, asserting that this is already happening. 3, arguments based on distrust of the government or ICE lack of legality. Again, ICE's lack of legality. They break into houses without warrants, so that's a valid argument. ICE is already doing bad things. Arguing that they might do other bad things is also valid. Like, if we're to take the stance that ICE is the modern-day Gestapo in any way, shape, or form, if we are to take that stance, then ask yourself, what would the previous era's Gestapo do? And then extrapolate that onto ICE. If there is a limit that they would not reach, then expect that ICE might similarly not go past that limit. But if there weren't limits and things led to camps and shit, then the argument has to be, hey, it happened somewhere else. It doesn't mean it can't happen here. The argument always has to be, it can happen here so that we can prevent it. The ideal is that we never have things escalate to camps. But Alligator Alcatraz happened, so it already did. Much of the discussion emerged from genuine belief that ICE has been granted new power or been authorized to detain someone for looking trans, and that opened the door for ICE to start profiling people. That, like Supreme Court's ruling last year, profiling has essentially been greenlit for trans people. To be 100% clear, there's not been any new ICE memo or policy related to trans people, gender markers, or documentation being in their jurisdiction. State Department policy about not misrepresenting birth sex on visa applications has existed for over a year. The only real danger posed by this policy is that more trans immigrants could have visas delayed or in extreme cases denied, and that they may need help navigating an increasingly confusing application process. Okay, I agree that that may be the most likely outcome of this, but I also, again, I understand seeing demons behind every corner. It makes perfect sense. We can argue that it's not useful for people to see demons behind every corner because, you know, they're not always there. But we have an administration right now that has been doing a lot of things to strip away things for trans people. If we're going to use the word genocide, which I believe does apply to what is happening to trans people in the United States, if we are to use that word genocide and use the meaning from the 10 steps of genocide, use examples for the 10 steps of genocide, showing that, hey, some of these steps have been taken, sometimes more of these steps have been taken, I can understand people freaking out about other shit, because at that point we've already gone past what many would consider a point of no return. Make no mistake, things can always get worse, and we can try to prevent them from getting worse. So that we do know of attempts to deport trans people. From news reportings last August, ICE detained a trans woman who overstayed her visa by 6 years. And in November, a trans woman who lost her lawful permanent resident status in 2023 after pleading guilty to a felony was inadvertently deported to Mexico, despite a court order specifically barring her from being sent to Mexico. There's no evidence that these women are targeted for removal on the basis of being trans, but what happened to them is still horrific. Okay. So, you know that the evidence of, or the absence of evidence in this case, is not necessarily evidence of absence. It's the fact that nobody involved said that we deported the trans person because they were trans and we didn't want the weird woman pretending freak here. It doesn't mean that nobody involved in it thought those thoughts and did things because of those reasons. It's just that nobody has stated that. Nothing on official documentation says that that has happened. I don't want to elicit more panic. Again, I don't think it's useful. But I also think saying that could not have been one of the things that was considered when deporting people to a place where they were supposed to not be deported to by a Supreme Court order, I feel like that's a bit silly. Just like saying it was because they were trans is a bit silly. Both of those things, I think, are true. We don't have evidence of absence. We just have an absence of evidence. When I posted about this online in an attempt to dissuade a panic-inducing misinformation, people argued that even if this has yet to happen, ICE still could expand their operations to include profiling and targeting trans people for detention, since they've already been profiling and rounding up random brown people. After all, I write for a podcast, said it could happen here, and ICE has detained both citizens and legal immigrants and sent them to camps. Just because I work on a news show called It Could Happen Here doesn't mean I should spread unsubstantiated doom spiraling, disconnected from the material reality of real policies advancing a fascist project. Okay, I'm glad that they at least are saying that they're not trying to downplay any of this. They're just trying to keep things in the realm of reasonability. Sure, the Trump admin has been very clear and open about targeting groups of people flooding through our southern border. That's who ICE is designed to target. ICE has policies directing them to do so and expanded authority from the Supreme Court. It is true that ICE has temporarily detained U.S. citizens when looking for people that they suspect are undocumented immigrants. This has been for two reasons: U.S. citizens accused of interfering with ICE activity while protesting, or because ICE suspects U.S. citizens may be undocumented based on factors like skin tone, occupation, or speaking a foreign language like Spanish. Man, you know what's so weird when you look at things that happened in other countries that rhyme a little bit with harmony? When you consider what happened there, the whole, like, first they came for poem, it's not weird to think that ICE would expand the people they're harassing just a little bit further. That, man, I hate that I'm so of two minds about this. I hate it because, like, on the one hand, I want to just say, yeah, spreading panic doesn't help, and we need to have grounded information on everything. On the other hand, if we have enough information to infer the next bad thing that's going to happen, I feel like it's perfectly reasonable to infer the next bad thing's going to happen. This was an argument I had with a person who I used to have a lot of respect for, and now they hate my guts. I'm not going to name them. But I did a video on my disagreements about how they were arguing in regards to Project 2025. And then this person started making their own videos and their own posts about all the bad things Project 2025 was doing towards trans people, all the things that me and others were telling them were going to happen. And it's so fucking frustrating. Dorita says, say my name, coward. It's not you, but I have talked to you about who it is. During my brief engagement in this online discourse, somebody sent me a Wikipedia article claiming it proved that ICE has deported 170 U.S. citizens during Trump administration. The article actually said that 170 citizens have been detained since Trump took office. There have been few reported instances of U.S.-born citizens being deported. These were citizen children deported with immigrant parents to avoid child separation. The last argument people fall back on is simply that ICE is a completely lawless agency that can do whatever it wants, including going after trans people. After all, ICE has murdered U.S. citizens on camera in broad daylight. But it's important to remember that happened for a reason. Those were not random acts. All right? So Renee Good and Alex Preddy happened for a reason. They were not random acts. Okay, ICE and CBP murdered people protesting ICE raids targeting immigrant neighbors. Federal agents killed people because the protesting was an inconvenience. And there was a use of force policy and training directing ICE to do so. For decades, CBP agents have killed people at the border and gotten away with it. That doesn't make it better. That claim A. Well, they're not completely lawless. They've been killing with impunity at the border. And they've killed people for being inconvenient. That does not make things better. That does not make anything better. Maybe my reading comprehension is terrible. Maybe it is me misunderstanding what the article writer is saying. And in the comment section or in the chat, wherever you feel like informing me, hell, if you are the original writer over at Shatterstone and you're seeing this video and you're getting mad at me for misrepresenting everything you're saying, then maybe let me know, like, where I'm incorrect here, because I feel like this bit here is throwing me for a fucking loop. The Trump admin may not care about the law, but this analysis is not based on any assumptions about legality. It's based on the administration's own stated goals, which they've been very open about, and the policies and practices currently in effect, none of which relate to ICE targeting people for looking trans. The Kavanaugh stops have never been used to target trans people for looking trans as reasonable suspicion of being illegally in the country, and there have been no change in guidelines saying that people being trans can be the basis for a stop. But if they can shoot people with impunity, and if they've done that, then why wouldn't they be able to just fucking stop people with impunity? If they're not supposed to use... If they're supposed to use a warrant to break into a person's house, but they don't need a warrant to break into people's house because Kristi Noem sent them a memo that said they can... I agree, Bregman. This is a weird needle to thread. This is basically every domino is set up for this tragic thing to happen. But it hasn't happened yet, so don't be worried about it happening. That again, if you're the person who wrote the article and you're listening to this, one, holy shit, I have a ton of respect for you, because listening to people criticize your work is definitely Garrison Davis. If you're saying that, I completely understand. I get it. I do. At the same time, I have a ton of respect for you for listening to me doing this. If I've misrepresented anything in here, let me know. If I'm misunderstanding something, let me know. The broad point seems to be things are not as bad as you think, so don't treat them like they're that bad, because that's not useful. I can agree with that. Some of the assertions in here about that get you to that conclusion, though, I'm not 100% on board with. And I'm halfway through the article. There's a ton more in the article. There's a bit in here about constant catastrophe that I want to briefly get into. I have 5 more minutes before I have to leave to get sake pizza. Again, I was told it's trans day of visibility. I don't have a choice. I have to do it. But, okay. So trans internet is trapped in a state of catastrophic fear. This is maintained by a near constant wave of articles that flood the zone with panic-inducing headlines, which then fuel social media posts that further escalate and abstract claims made in headlines to a Nazi Germany-esque level of potential danger facing trans people. One such impending danger circulating online is a claim that the FDA is making a registry of trans women and moving to criminalize DIY estrogen. This claim originated from an article in a trans news outlet published March 12th, reporting that anti-trans lobbying groups sent a petition to the FDA to create a registry of trans women who take estrogen and to restrict the use of feminizing HRT, which, if implemented, would fast-track a pathway to criminalizing estrogen use. So that article is from The Needle. I'm not familiar with The Needle at all, so... Importantly, the citizens' petition is not a U.S. law or proposed government legislation, nor is it FDA policy or regulation. It was written by an anti-trans activist coalition and sent to the FDA over 3 months ago. The petition requests immediate action by establishing a new docket for the public to officially comment on the safety and effectiveness of estrogen in gender transitions and to schedule a public hearing on the subject. That is mainly what the petition is for, though it does make further recommendations following the conclusion of the public hearing. These recommendations include adding a warning label to estrogen, conducting a safety review, having clinicians report adverse events to the FDA, requiring drug manufacturers to establish a patient registry as part of a risk evaluation studies to capture real-world safety data. This seems... Okay, so ask yourself, real quick, look at the petition real quick. 16-page petition, and it's not loading, and that is fantastic. I love the internet. It was not a mistake. Okay, so just ask yourself a question real quick. I really, really need to ask, do you believe that a petition written to inconvenience or take away, or like just inconvenience, to inconvenience trans people was written in good faith? Because it feels like you're assuming that the words written in the suggestions are all good faith. And I feel like there is enough evidence right now that anti-trans think tanks, anti-progressive movements, anti-progressive organizations, there is a good argument to be made about not looking at anything they say in good faith, not pretending that anything they say will actually be good faith. I don't know if I can truly articulate the case incredibly well, but I feel, again, like there is a case to be made about how these people, they do not operate in good faith, and so treating them like the things they say are in good faith is potentially a bad idea. The article, or more accurately, distorted versions of its claims, went viral around trans Twitter with tens of thousands of likes and hundreds of thousands of views, but received strong pushback on Blue Sky for being sensationalist and inflammatory. It's almost like Blue Sky is the better platform. Weird. Now, granted, I can argue that they're sensationalist. That does seem to be the case based on what you've presented here, especially when the information was directly contradicted by the things you pointed out. Sure, I can agree with that. But the criticism here seems to be about a game of telephone that is inadvertently going to happen with anything, especially Twitter, where like the discourse, people fighting about shit, is what will actually lead to things going viral on there. Granted, let's look at what they said here. A study from 2016 found that on average, these petitions require about 3 years for a final agency decision, and many decisions remain pending 10 or 13 years after the initial submission. The FDA petition story was not the only article this month theorizing about a trans registry or adult HRT restrictions. In mid-March, multiple LGBTQ news outlets reported that Republican lawmakers in Tennessee advanced a bill that would create a public list of trans residents in the state. The bill in question mandates insurance companies also cover detransition and would require the care providers submit statistics on gender-affirming care to the Tennessee Department of Health, which must not contain individually identifiable information defined in HIPAA, because the current administration has not violated HIPAA in any way, shape, or form, I guess. I don't have an exact example on that, so don't hold me to that particular claim. The Tennessee Department of Health would then use that information to make a publicly available statistics report. Let's see here. But online accounts are spreading the stories of Tennessee as making a sex offender-style public registry with the names and locations of all trans people in the state. Yeah, that is definitely sensationalist at that point, because that's not what is being argued by the letter of that. When it's the actual law, when it's the words of the law, those words tend to be followed. Also, there just says HIPAA, 20 states sue after the Trump administration releases private Medicaid data to deportation officials. Oh, okay. Yeah, I wasn't aware that was going to be shown, like, instantaneously, but it was. So, yeah, okay. This current admin violates HIPAA. It may not be the defense you think it is. Now, granted, I can still say it is sensationalizing to argue that this shit is going to happen. But again, there is precedent that it does happen. What else is here? The Substack incentive. So what purpose does this sort of doom posting serve, and why are people so primed to believe it? These panic-driven claims rest on the very real fact that trans people are facing present danger. I mean, they do acknowledge that. That is good. Oftentimes, people boosting these panic stories are genuinely trying to help inform their own community of potential harm. In the case of that ICE story, it was based on the assumption that there was a legitimate recent rule change enabling ICE to target people under suspicion of being trans. It makes sense that people want to raise the alarm about ICE gaining new powers, but ACLU staff attorney Picasso cautioned, "We are supporting our community by trying to warn people, but these warnings need to be clear and accurate. Otherwise, we end up inadvertently contributing to the chaos and fear." Other times, these panic stories are spread with the hope of scaring allies into caring about the ongoing attacks on trans people. Perhaps successfully, in some cases, I don't know, but it's a side effect the strategy deals significant damage to people it's trying to protect. Forecasting inevitable doom 24/7 can drive people into hopeless despair and push them away from strategies to fight against the current attacks on trans rights. Panic-driven agitator propaganda could contribute to a girl who cried wolf scenario where allies start to discount concerns about certain attacks on trans rights due to previous unsubstantiated viral claims. Okay, that I agree with. That I 100% agree with. This is one of the reasons why you need to hedge your bets very, very well. Point out, hey, we don't have precedence of this happening right now, but we do have enough dominoes to say that it can happen. So be careful, be prepared. Do talk to your local legislators about trying to reverse shit. Do talk to them about trying to not have things like the Tennessee law. Do those things. Absolutely do those things. I can understand the people catastrophizing as well, because again, there is reason to catastrophize. We can all agree there is reason to panic. We can also agree that the panic specifically does not help anything. I hate that I'm so of two minds about this article. I feel like the overall point of the article I agree with. Some of the specifics I have nitpicks with, But the overall point of the article being, hey, we need to have accurate information, make sure that people know that that bad things are happening, but not catastrophize those things. Sure, I agree with that. I think the biggest problem, though, is the system that this is all in, because those Substack articles don't exist in a vacuum. They exist as things that people will proliferate on Facebook and on Twitter and other areas, as evidenced by the article talking about that. And those platforms do actually, like Facebook and Twitter especially, do actually reward sensationalization, which is a flaw in those platforms. It is an awful flaw in both of them. Facebook has actually been under legal scrutiny for aiding and abetting in shit like this, making people panic, making people angry at each other, monetizing that. And Twitter has been doing it for years, and even more so now that Elon Musk is in charge of it. So I think that the criticism has to be aimed multiple ways. One, at the people who give the inaccurate data to begin with, and two, at the systems that enable that inaccurate data to, via a game of telephone, become a giant whirlwind of chaos that people will use for monetary benefit. People not being the people who even write in the articles. The fucking people who own Facebook and Twitter are the ones that benefit from that at that point. Don't be panicked, be prepared. That would be my takeaway here. Again, maybe I am misunderstanding some points of the article. If that is the case, and if the owner of this particular article, Garrison Davis, actually does see my video, I doubt they will. It's an hour of listening to my incessant bullshit. Probably not going to happen. If they do hear it though, maybe they can correct me on the things that I'm getting wrong here, because I feel like we're on the same side. It's just a matter of how to make that event function for everybody. Pray for Israel says, no kings. Did a king take over America? Ah, I see. We have an idiot in the chat. I don't have time for you. We're just going to go ahead and time you out. I already talked about how people misrepresent the idea of the No Kings movement already. I've already done an entire video about that. That was at the very beginning of this stream. You weren't here for it. It's going to be in the VOD later. You can handle that later. I don't have time for your incessant bullshit. I'm just going to time you out. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. That is going to be the last topic I have time to cover because, again, it is Trans Day of Visibility, so I visibly have to go pick up a pizza for a trans girl. So I'm going to go do that. Thank you all for watching. Again, Garrison, if you see this, then, let me know where I got things wrong, because I am not so arrogant as to believe that I got everything correct here. Maybe there are areas where I'm just dumb. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I will see you all in the next one. Hey, you made it to the end. I want to give an extra thanks to the patrons who allow me to do this full time. I want to thank Aaron Rail, Astral, Britzkrieg, Jemshin, Poundini, Red Joker, Victoria, Jonas, Craig, Tarika, Fireshard, Smiling GM, John, Dren Hadamada, Creeper, Sagitta, I'm not saying that last part, Sylvie Snow, Valis of Seraph, Ottoman Angel, Rooster Rachel, and Fire Panda, who are all my $20 and up patrons.